Insta360 just released their newest version of their smartphone gimbal, the Flow 2 Pro, and this may very well be the best smartphone gimbal of 2025. I'm actually working on that comparison video right now, and the Flow 2 Pro is a definite contender. But there is the big question of how it compares to the original Insta360 Flow gimbal, so that's what this video is going to be focused on. Now, considering this is only the second gimbal that Insta360 has ever made, and also the fact that they are not sponsoring this video, they didn't even send me this gimbal to test out. I actually paid for it with my own money. And that's because I think that there really are some impressive improvements. Specifically, 7 reasons why you might want to choose the Flow 2 Pro over the original Flow gimbal. But first, let's start out with what has not changed. The Flow 2 Pro, like the original Flow, is still a 3-axis stabilizer for smartphones, both Androids and iPhones, that is foldable, and it also has one-step rapid deployment. It also has a built-in tripod, so you can easily set it down at any time if you want to use its AI tracking features. More on that later, because that is definitely the most exciting part of this whole gimbal. But speaking of that built-in mini tripod, it's one of my favorite features of this gimbal because others, like the DJI M6, are separate and they're not built in. On the Flow 2 Pro, that mini tripod has been upgraded, so it's bigger and more robust and it's easier to deploy than on the original Flow. And it offers a lot more support, so I think that's been a really big upgrade on the new Flow 2 Pro. Now when it comes to the physical design, notice that compared to the original, the Flow 2 Pro looks more like other phone gimbals, like the DJI M6. When it's unfolded, it looks slightly bigger than the original, especially because the hand grip is longer, which is a welcome improvement because it's a lot easier to hold. There's also the option to get the new magnetic mount that appears to be a lot faster and easier to attach compared to those clamp style mounts. I don't have it here to test because unfortunately at the moment it is out of stock, so I'm really bummed because it looks like it's going to be a lot more useful than using this clamp. I mean, this clamp is really minimal, but you know, the only usage is to attach it to this gimbal. This new magnetic mount, even though it is limited in compatibility to phones with MagSafe, it also can double as a phone stand, so you can get a lot more usage out of it. And so that's something that I really hope to test out, and I think it'll be a really nice improvement on this Flow 2 Pro. The next unique feature is, I think, one of the biggest improvements on the Flow 2 Pro, and that is AI Deep Tracking 4.0, which offers multiple tracking modes. So, you know, the AI tracking is already quite good in the original Flow, but I didn't think it was possible, but Insta360 actually upgraded that AI tracking and made it even better. So on the new Flow 2 Pro, we have some new tracking features. So on a very basic level, I can go ahead and draw a box around my face and the gimbal will start to track me as I move around. And so this is really basic tracking. This is something that the original Flow Pro does as well. But on the new Flow 2 Pro, we have some new options down here. So if I have the gimbal on a tripod like I do right now, I can go ahead and select Tracking Plus. So now the gimbal will continue to track me, but I believe the tracking is a little bit more accurate, or just, you know, you do have to have the gimbal or the phone on a tripod in order to use this feature, but you're able to move around even pretty erratically, get farther away. I can even turn around, have my back to the camera, and it will still track me. So the tracking is, you know, bumped up a notch when you're using the Tracking Plus feature. Another new feature we have here is Pro Framing Grid. So you might notice that by default, if you selected a subject, that the gimbal and the camera app will attempt to keep that subject in the center of the frame. But sometimes you may not want that. Maybe you want to be, you know, focused in a different part of the frame. So for that, you can now select Pro Framing Grid. And now, this is the default. But if I want the subject off to, you know, the far upper corner like that, I could select that, or even lower it a bit. I can go in the other quadrant here. So you can see that it's really helpful for helping to reframe. And so now, if I'm moving around, the camera
app is trying to keep me in that quadrant that I've selected rather than keeping me directly in the center. Another new tracking mode we have is auto zoom. So now if you select the subject and you want to zoom in at a certain focal range, the camera app and the gimbal will attempt to keep the same amount of zoom on that subject. Even if it's moving away from the camera or coming towards the camera, you have the same amount of zoom. You can also use this in conjunction with active zoom tracking, which gives you super accurate tracking even when your subject is farther away. You can see here that I'm 15 times zoomed in, and even then, the gimbal does not lose track of Julian, even though it can't really see his face because he's wearing a hat and he's often hiding his face. He's sometimes hiding behind this tree and other objects, and yet the gimbal continues to track Julian extremely well. The Flow 2 Pro is also amazing at tracking multiple subjects. So if I've got 1, 2, or even 3 subjects, I can draw a box around them, and the gimbal will track all 3 and attempt to keep them all in the frame. It will prioritize one person in particular to try to make them, the primary target, but still, it does a really good job of trying to keep all the subjects in the frame as best as it can.
The next unique feature of the Flow 2 Pro is Apple Dock Kit compatibility. Now, before I explain that, I do think it might be available on the original Flow gimbal, but don't quote me on that, but I have seen some other creators use it on the original Flow gimbal, but it is definitely available on the Flow 2 Pro. So Apple Dock Kit, if you're not familiar with it, it is only available for iPhones, does not work with Android phones. But if you connect your phone to the Apple Dock Kit, you just hold the phone close to the NFC reader that is here on the Flow 2 Pro. And it takes a little while, in my experience, but eventually your phone will scan this little NFC part of the gimbal, and it will connect to the Flow 2 Pro. And once that happens, you can use the autofocus tracking without having to use the Insta360 phone app, which, that phone app is pretty good, but say you want to use another app such as the native iPhone camera app, maybe the Blackmagic camera app, even live stream on Instagram or TikTok or even Zoom, you can use any of those other apps as long as you're connected via Apple Dock Kit. And the gimbal will still track you. Now the tracking is a little bit delayed. It's not as snappy if you're going to be using it this way. So if you are tracking a fast-moving subject, you'll probably want to do that within the Insta360 camera app. But the tracking is still pretty accurate. Like even if I hide and I come back into the frame, like the camera and the gimbal still pick me up and they're able to track me. So this is a really welcome improvement on the Insta360 Flow 2 Pro. Might be available in the original Flow Pro, but again, don't quote me on that. But it is not available on any other gimbals at the moment. This is an Insta360 gimbal exclusive. The next unique feature of the Flow 2 Pro is the ability to remote control it in 2 ways. So on both the original Flow Pro and the Flow 2 Pro, you can connect via the Apple Watch and use the Apple Watch to preview your footage as well as to do some basic controls like change the settings or use the joystick function to control the gimbal from afar. But on the Flow 2 Pro, within the Insta360 phone app, there is the new option to scan a QR code. So if you have a friend's phone, you can scan the QR code, and then that phone can become a remote control for the gimbal, which is really nice if you want to, say, take a selfie, or you have one phone that's on the gimbal filming, and then you want to use that other phone as a remote control. So you do have to have 2 phones to do that, but again, that's a feature I have not seen other gimbals offer, and it could be a really nice way to control the gimbal from afar if you don't have an Apple Watch. The next unique feature of the Flow 2 Pro is something I have not seen on other smartphone gimbals, including the original Flow. And that is the ability to do 360-degree infinite panning or tracking. So that applies right now if you're just using the joystick. You can have it go in a circle and it will never stop. Or if you have that AI tracking enabled, you can, walk circles around the gimbal and it'll keep tracking you. Now, if you try to do this with other smartphone gimbals, including the original Flow Pro, you pretty much always run into a limit where it tracks you pretty well, but at some point it hits a wall and just stops. And that's something that does not happen with the Flow 2 Pro. So if you do plan to move around a lot, and walk circles and you really need to show something off, then the Flow 2 Pro is definitely the best gimbal to do that. And part of the reason why it's able to do that is because the Flow 2 Pro within the Insta360 phone app also allows you to capture 360-degree photos without having to use a 360 camera. The next unique feature is also one I have not seen on other smartphone gimbals, including the original Flow, and that is free tilt mode.
So one thing I really dislike about a lot of gimbals is that if I want to do like this tilt shot where I'm panning up and down and showing a subject off, it's really hard to do with the way that the gimbal is built. But the nice thing about the Flow 2 Pro is that it has this new free tilt mode, which allows you to get better up and down pans of a subject. So I can partially extend the gimbal here. I don't have to fully extend it. And I use that new tilt function to slightly tilt it. So now I'm in free tilt mode. So if I want to do this up and down pan of a subject, I'm able to do so a little more freely. I don't have that physical restriction of the gimbal anymore.
And the final unique feature of the Flow 2 Pro is available within the Insta360 phone app, and that is the ability to use it as a teleprompter. So this is something that not everyone will find helpful, but if you're someone like me who's constantly speaking to camera, then you might find a teleprompter to be really helpful. I'm actually using one right now. And teleprompters, you can import whole scripts, so you can just read off of it and it helps you stay focused. But you can also use it the way that I like to use it, which is not always importing a whole script, but I like to just import my bullet points. Or if I'm, saying something really technical and I have to get my specs exactly right, and I can't remember, all of those little specs, then that's another way to use the teleprompter, is just to add notes to the front of the camera so you're able to see them and not have to keep them up in your mind. So those are 7+ new features of the Insta360 Flow 2 Pro that I really do like. Actually, there's one more that I'm seeing now in my little screen, and I forgot to mention it. But there is actually a little mirror here, which you can use just to compose your shots. So if I'm looking at it right now, I'm able to see myself in the center, and now I know, because I don't have a selfie screen on my phone, where, or roughly what my phone is seeing. So that is a new feature on this gimbal that you don't get on the original Flow. But before I close out this video, I do want to go over a couple of things about the Flow 2 Pro that I'm not so wild about. I think that they could definitely be improved. The first is this joystick here. So I do like that they've redesigned the controls on the handle. It looks very sleek and modern. But one thing I don't like is that this joystick, it's kind of recessed. And so it's a little hard to get it into the positions that I want it to be, because it just looks like a really subtle button, which looks really nice, but in terms of being functional, I do think that this could definitely be better. I wish that it poked out just a little bit more, just to make it a little bit easier to use, because I do actually use the joystick quite a bit when I'm using my gimbals. The final thing about the Flow 2 Pro that I'm not so wild about is that Apple Kit NFC connection. I think it's a really cool feature, and I love the ability to use my native iPhone app in particular and be able to film with it and still be able to get that tracking. Once it is connected, it actually works really, really well, but in my experience, having that NFC connection, it takes a while. Like, the first times that I've tried to use it, I thought that my phone was broken or my gimbal was broken. I was like, I don't understand how this works. It sounds really easy in theory, just to hold your phone on this NFC connection and it's supposed to, magically connect. And eventually it does. But for me at least, like, it took 30 to 60 seconds to do that. And, I was convinced that, I had a faulty copy of my gimbal or something just wasn't working right. So I wish that that was something that happened a little bit faster. If there is a setting that I'm missing, then comment below, you guys, and tell me how I can do that faster. But to me, it's a really slow process that I think could be sped up and made to be a little bit more intuitive how to do that. So those are my thoughts about the brand new Insta360 Flow 2 Pro gimbal. I really liked the original Flow gimbal, and I still do, but I do think that if you own this gimbal, that the Flow 2 Pro has enough upgrades that make it worth the extra cost of changing your gimbal. I think that the form factor is a lot better. I like that the handle is longer. I like that the built-in tripod is a lot easier to deploy and a lot more useful. I love that flex tilt, or that tilting function on the end of the gimbal. The NFC connection is also really great when it works properly. And there's just a lot of little touches on this gimbal, in addition to that improved AI tracking, that make this a really solid smartphone gimbal. Again, it might be the best smartphone gimbal, but if you want to know the specifics of how I'm evaluating that and how it compares to other gimbals, like those by DJI or Hohem, then you'll have to check that video out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.